Well, good morning, everybody. As we start a new week here, we've got quite a bit of change happening in the pattern that I think is going to be important for a lot of us, including those that are going to experience a pretty wild swing in their temperatures. This is how things have shaped up in terms of ranks going back to the beginning of September and through the first 13 days of October. And there's a lot of ones on this map. And it's been all about that pattern we've covered so many times. The troughs that have lived here, large ridges that continue to extend from California and Arizona, clear at times through the Great Lakes and into the eastern side of Canada, keeping things so very, very warm. But as we know, we were watching for this pattern start to shift its way toward, much, much cooler conditions with time, just its fall progression, of course, but these fronts that are coming through bringing in these brief shots of quite cold air. It was interesting to note that the very, very warm conditions that the end of the season brought to the northern plains, the upper Midwest, this region which was so exceptionally wet back in spring, causing major planting delays, did allow a lot of this area to just completely catch up on GDDs. I went to Sioux Falls just through our forecasting system there on agweather.com. And while you do see these overnight lows getting down here below freezing the next 3 days, including this morning, if you come down here and click on the year-to-date GDD, I want you to see something. This white line is the average line. And if you take note, most of late summer, the GDD accumulation was below the 20-year average until the very end right here, where we can see major late season accumulation when it is supposed to kind of flatten out here as the first frost events typically arrive. I just want to show you one other thing here. If you look at the year-to-date precipitation in Sioux Falls, it was also, of course, exceptionally wet until we flatlined right here. And some places in the northern plains have not measured rainfall since the beginning of September. In Sioux Falls, the last time you measured it was on September 1st. That's the last time, measurable precipitation greater than a fraction of an inch was observed. So interesting to think that this year is going to go down. When you think back about, the summer and the growing season of 2024, it's going to be, it was such a crazy wet year. But in reality, all of that was front-loaded here mainly in June, when we had just truly epic flooding, followed by extremely dry weather at the end of this. That brings me to another important point, just keeping it on this graphic. This upcoming winter, right? It's always interesting to study the human psychology and the interpretation of winter. I was talking to some people earlier who remembered last winter as a really, really cold winter. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It was so mild, but their memory was of that week in January where all we were talking about was playing football at minus 30 degrees. Do you remember that? So we just tend to get stuck on one thing here. Okay, well, getting past that, let me show you what we're looking at early this morning here in terms of our all hazards weather map, We have freeze warnings out for several states here in the northern plains, upper Midwest, frost advisories, frost warnings, freeze watches that extend out farther. We've got them over here in Pennsylvania, looking at Pennsylvania, but we also have them here in Michigan as well. And this is it. We're going to have a pretty chilly time period throughout this week. Our frost map, again, this is showing all these locations that could potentially dip down there into the low 30s. It's pretty extensive across the United States. So there are a couple of chances of getting some pretty chilly air in place. So that's going to be one topic. The next is going to be the winds. Over the next 7 days, we have pretty windy conditions in the central plains of the United States coming out of the Rocky Mountains and also here in parts of the Canadian Prairie, where we could expect to see wind gusts maybe above 40 to touching 50 miles an hour at times in the plains. So be prepared for that. I'll show you how and when that's coming in a few moments. Also, we need to talk about the chances for snow in the Rocky Mountains here, in the Cascades, maybe in the Sierra Nevada, and some light snow that could be running around the edge of a broader trough that's living over the east. And take a look at some of the snow in parts of the northern parts or upstate parts of New York, getting into Vermont, New Hampshire, maybe Maine, and then here into Ontario as well. And then lastly, the big thing we need to talk about over this next week is the chances for getting some precipitation coming out of the Four Corners into the plains. Now, if I had to kind of show you a spot that I think is just going to continue to struggle with getting moisture, I'm going to talk about this area from the lower and mid-Mississippi River Valley into the eastern Corn Belt. There seems to be the highest probability of staying dry right in through this area, which is, of course, as we looked back earlier. I'll show you that, I guess, in a few moments here. You got the precip stats in a moment here. That area has been quite dry and will likely stay there. But moisture into this area, it's something to be on the lookout for, and we need to certainly be talking about it. Okay, maybe one more thing real quick. I will be watching the tropics all week. I'm very uncertain about a couple of things here, so I'm going to have to spend more time thinking about it. But, the National Hurricane Center has given a 40% chance to see if they've done an update on this. Okay, they got the 7:38 a.m. update, so a 50% chance of development of a tropical system. This is like an African easterly wave making its way across this area. And you can see the models are somewhere in that neighborhood as well, 50 to 70% chance of getting this thing to develop. But it's all going to depend on the timing of systems coming through the United States, position of the Bermuda High, which is no longer over here anymore, and where this system could possibly curl. We also need to keep an eye here on the western side of the Caribbean. Again, this is all a part of our October Caribbean gyre or Central American gyre phenomenon. So we just continue to see the risk of some deeper convection in that area. But as we look at the broader picture of all of this, this is just a quick view today of what the winds are going to look like. So deep low that's moving through parts of the northeast. We'll talk about that in a few moments. Here's this next system that has a chance at developing. But overall, our Bermuda High is somewhere in this vicinity. And for the last 45 days, it's been way over here by Africa. Remember, we just watched it send systems around up toward Europe repeatedly after coming off of Africa. But that allowed the door to open up for, of course, Helene and Milton to come through here, and also Francine before that. But now we're looking at a much more normal position of the Bermuda High. So all of these things kind of stitched together get us to kind of a broader discussion about the pattern. And this is certainly different, right? For weeks, all we could talk about was low pressure here. And now you can see the models have built in a ridge. So over the next 15 days, this is a 15-day average, putting it all together. I now see the jet stream doing this. I had been drawing that line for you, displaced this direction by several hundred miles. It's now shifted. We will be seeing at times ridging coming back into this area, but each time one of these troughs dives through it will disrupt that ridge temporarily. We see a deep North Atlantic trough in this place, more ridging that's now happening over Western Europe, which is where we've had so many systems kind of coming in like this off the Atlantic, so that's starting to shift things up. And there's now lower pressure being forecast over parts of Western Russia, Eastern Europe. So that's kind of our pattern across the Northern Hemisphere as it's begun to shift overall. And what this leads to is more activity in the Western U.S. So this is the European model 0Z run today, looking at the 10-day average precipitation anomalies. And again, I kind of stress there's an area in through here and possibly into the northeast as well, although we have moisture coming through there today. But overall, we're looking at a broad area that extends from eastern Texas into the Mid-South, Ohio Valley, that's just got the drier risks. But coming out of the Four Corners states, there are a couple of systems we need to have a discussion about that could pull their moisture into the plains and take some of it up here into parts of the upper Midwest and Ontario. We see more repeated troughs of low pressure coming into the west, which is kind of the onset of what I think will be the wet season for the western United States, or at least the beginnings of it. And why this is so critical and important kind of comes down to these next three maps, all right? So here's the map I meant to click on a few moments ago, but this is what we're looking at since September through the 13 days of October. We've made it so far, looking at precipitation ranks. So no early arrival of the wet season in the west, the southwest exceptionally hot and very dry. We see that there are now more districts in the western Corn Belt, the upper Midwest, around the Great Lakes that are now at the 132 mark, meaning that this has been the driest, stretch of days, that stretch of days going back 132 years. And we can also see the Northeast is very, very dry. And just to keep going with these same graphics so you can see them update each day, this is the latest I have on the 40 centimeter or 16-inch soil moisture values. And as anticipated, even though Helene dumped a bunch of water in the Mississippi here, the river this morning is now down to 5.83 feet below low stage. So that was a brief interlude of water in the river, but now we're back here and getting toward these critical values of around -10 to -11. So that's the setup for what I think needs to be watched most carefully in the coming days and weeks. So on satellite, let's just take a look at Sunday here. We watched a low curl right through Wisconsin, going right over Lake Michigan. Quite a bit of wildfire smoke. You can see some new fires and also some existing ones in the northwest that continue to put out quite a bit of smoke right coming through this area as well. But that low in the overnight hours has kind of curled its way up here, and just as the sun was rising early this morning, we're going to look at the chances of this bringing in some precipitation. I'm going to go over to the high-res NAM to kind of get a view of this. There we go. Just wanted to reload for you. And we can see the showers moving through parts of the northeast, with some showers on the backside here, coming through parts of Wisconsin, maybe into Illinois. A couple of showers are possible in Indiana and Ohio. And we do see the models attempting to give us some lake-enhanced precipitation as well. So we're going to have to watch out for that too. Just playing this out through Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon and evening. Again, you can see the lake enhancement. But by this point, I think a lot of attention is going to turn back to the west as we see our first kind of decent frontal boundary moving through parts of the Pacific Northwest. Again, this is going to be on Tuesday night and Wednesday morning. And what will need to be watched is how this next system kind of evolves into the Four Corners states. So with that kind of giving us an idea through midday Wednesday, let's turn this over to kind of a height pattern analysis to see the main features here. So here we go. Here's the trough that's going to usher in the cold air, much drier air on the backside with the chance for some lake enhancement and some moisture moving through the northeast. As we play through Tuesday into Wednesday, there's the trough I mentioned coming through midweek that's going to come through the northwest. And what I'm concerned about is this piece that breaks off toward the Four Corner states. That's what I mentioned just a moment ago. So you saw the main bit of the trough taken off here. It looks like we close off a low that's over, over the Four Corner states. Now, in some previous forecasts, this didn't happen, meaning that this low is going to get carried straight through the Midwest. But instead, if it's cut off, it's going to sit and spin and then doesn't have anywhere to go. Do you notice that? That's Thursday through Saturday and Sunday. And it just doesn't go anywhere. And as a result, this could make for this like strip right in through here of, a bit more interesting weather. And I can't rule out the fact that as that trough kind of comes out in this area, do we have the chance for ripping off some supercells out ahead of this, some severe weather out ahead of it? I'm just going to let you know where I'm watching. I'm watching the base of this trough as it goes from here to there, okay? So I'll be watching that at the end of this weekend and next weekend. There's certainly going to be an open transport of moisture out ahead of it, so a lot of that's in the cards here. But as we get into next week, we watch another trough coming in. And most of this time period, the jet's just kind of living up here, trying to kick off these little systems at times. But what is important about this is where these systems are coming from. And even out there toward the end of the month, we just continue to see ridging happening here where it had been troughing for weeks and weeks and weeks. So thinking all of that through, let's get into a couple of pieces with this. I just wanted to give you kind of a quick array of 5 models next 7 days, real quick. And if you just glance, just blur your eyes and look, they all have pretty much the same picture, don't they? If we take this over to a probability graphic, that's what this one is. This is the next 7 days where we're looking at the chance of getting over a half inch. A chance of getting over a half inch all the way through next Sunday night. And as we play this forward and just add more days on, that's the 10-day chance of getting over a half inch. So you notice where we're focusing this, in the northwest, but really where we typically get wet first. So this is going to be on the windward side of our mountain chains. Could be Northern California. We also watch the Four Corner states coming into the plains, and then the first system rolling around the Great Lakes. On the drier side of this, let's go down there and just look at who's going to get less than 1/10 of an inch. And this will probably update. Okay, good. Here's the original, the 0Z run. There's that area that I've been so concerned about. Lower Mississippi Valley, parts of the southeast, but eastern Texas up to my home state of Illinois here. So we see all of that, and then we need to walk through and kind of play out in the models when and where this precipitation is coming in. And I also want you to pay attention to the wind field here as we watch the isobars. So this is getting us through tonight. You can see some of the chances for snow in the interior here. Some lake enhancement, just some scattered showers. Windy in the northern plains. It will be this high pressure cell that you see coming in here on Tuesday into Wednesday that's really going to drop the temperatures off. That's probably going to be our coldest morning Wednesday morning as the high settles into Missouri and Kansas and Oklahoma. At that point, the fronts come through the west. And then we see, look at this. This wind's going to, as this high pressure cell anchors here, this is going to start to drive a very, very fast wind into the northern plains. When are we? This is like Wednesday night into Thursday. And that wind on Thursday, I think, is going to be really strong in this area. So that's going to be an extremely windy end to this week. Thursday, watch out for it in the central United States. This is when we could get snow, Cascades, snow in the Rockies. Where are we in the week? We're Thursday, getting into Friday, and the low is going to cut off over the Four Corner states. And here it is. It's just going to sit there. See? It could make snow, but it finally leaves right there. So watch Colorado and New Mexico. This is Monday into Tuesday. That's when I'm concerned about a corridor of potentially strong storms opening up in this area as that low ejects. But off the west coast, we see more lows. We likely see whatever develops in the tropics staying away from the southeast. We'll be watching for that all week. All right. So from here, let's go look out at week 2. CPC, European Ensemble, Artificial Intelligence, and the GFS. They do have a different look. Notice that the European Ensemble, very dry from eastern Texas to New England. The AIFS has a system coming right through the midsection of the U.S. The GFS has something similar. I have not yet been able to pin down what's what into week 2 just yet. I've got to see how this week's cutoff low behaves before I can make any sort of a confident call on what I think is going to happen with those. So just wanted to let you know that. So from there, let's talk about temperatures. We've already discussed how cool this air is going to get by Wednesday morning. Here's Monday morning's lows. We've already experienced these. That's Tuesday. Getting into Wednesday. There it is. So this white line in here is where the model's putting down, that's the frost line essentially. So that's our cold morning. There's Thursday, another cold one in the Ohio Valley, getting into the northeast. But you know these temperatures are going to be volatile because ahead of that next system that's going to come out, remember how windy it's going to be? That wind's going to be coming out of the south and driving in some very warm air into the central U.S. So that's Saturday into Sunday. High temperatures, what they look like, much cooler across the Great Lakes Basin, Mississippi, Ohio, all the way into New England today. 81, here in parts of Montana. That would be Tuesday into Wednesday. Front comes into the west. Heat in Montana. I think Montana, you may have the warmest spot outside of the southwest. Or maybe this part of Texas as well. Pretty crazy to see that. Here's Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And I remember we're watching that system at this point, getting into Sunday. Okay. What about the week 2 temperature pattern? So look at these two maps here and here in both the European and the GFS. So notice the big warm-up that's following this. But every time I look out here around day 10, we see kind of an anchoring of colder air in this place. And this is what had been here, or it had been here. And so this is a shift to the east of this pattern. So now we're going to start to get systems that want to do this. And that's really going to change things up as we go farther to the end of this month. And that was reflected in the newest update from the WPC. And their week 3, week 4, which is the last week of October, first week of November, has that, right? Can you see it? Trough of low pressure here, more ridging in this area. So don't think of this as being warm every day. It just means you're going to have these big warm-ups punctuated by cool downs. And if the flow comes in like that, yeah, we do have better chances of bringing in moisture into this very, very dry part of the Midwest. Is it echoed by the European model? Yeah, it is. This is going even farther through the month of November. And again, the European model is opening up this corridor to better precip, and systems are trying to make this turn, and that's why we see better moisture coming into this part of the country. Now, I want to be very clear. It took us, in the most recent episode, right, it's taken us about 45 days to drive in this drought into the midsection of the country, in some places 60 days. In some places, I know I can already foresee the comments. You feel like you've been in 4 years of drought, and so I understand that. But I'm just saying that this is not going to bust that. It is at least a look in a different direction. And you have to ask, is there a failure mode with this? There is a failure mode with this forecast. And I think it has something to do with the MJO. So if the MJO does in fact sweep into phase 4 through 4, lives a bit in 5 and 6, okay, if it does do that, then this is what history would tell us. We do tend to get patterns where there's troughs here and some ridging there. But I got to be careful. If this trough is displaced at all to the west, then the ridging dominates and we go back to what we saw in October and September. That's what happens if you get MJO phase 5. What if you have MJO phase 6? Well, now this is just not the super active pattern that it could be. Now, if I saw this and it was January, that's different. But we're in fall, a weaker flow time period, and we're not in January. So what I'm trying to say here is that we got to be very careful. These troughs have to get closer to the west coast United States to really revive moisture in this area, to use the ridge, letting it slide at times to the east to open up the Gulf. Do you see what I'm saying? So I just want to let you know that this is I show you this and I'm holding it in a very fragile way, understanding that even though the model's trended toward this, we've got to get troughs entering the West Coast in order to bring the moisture into this area. Okay? All right. From there, I do want to let you know that La Nina does have a bit of an influence on this. In November, where is it typically wet when there's a La Nina? We do tend to drive, sorry about that, more troughs of low pressure into the northwest, which is what tends to keep it wetter. You notice there's not strong correlation with La Nina in the month of November here. We're very close to the zero value. We do tend to be drier south and southeast in Novembers with La Nina. And sure, we still have that. La Nina is there, and it's trying to get going. The easterly wind bursts are trying to pick back up, but I still think the most dominant thing in our pattern is this, and the high pressure that's been so near it as of late. And it's just shifting around a bit right now, but that's what I'm watching most carefully. So given that we've looked out now into the month of November, I'm still waiting on one more forecast model to show up, the IRI. Then the CPC will release theirs. So that's Columbia University. That's where the IRI multi-model probability forecast system comes from. And then the CPC, our own Climate Prediction Center, will release their forecast. All that'll come in this week. When it does, I'll show you them all lined up. So the NMME, which you hear me talk about all the time, the CPC, IRI, and the ECMWF. So there's your alphabet soup this morning of weather forecasting acronyms. But that's what we'll keep an eye on. I do want to show you this. Over the next 10 to 15 days, there is a pretty robust signal that we're going to be moving the MJO over to that phase 6. And I want to watch that carefully because I would expect that to happen if we had a bit of a resurgence in La Nina-like trade winds. And you can see this color shading in through here. So from now through the 29th, we're going to get some trade winds kicking back up again. So what this is likely going to do is this is going to give us a stronger La Nina signal as we go forward. And we want to know how much farther into the months, our late fall and winter months this is going to hang on. So I think it'll be critical to that forecast. So just understand that I think these longer range models are going to be very biased to that. So I want to finish with South America. And over the weekend, Sunday, there's still wildfire smoke here, but this is what the beginning of a monsoon looks like. See these deeper storms? As NOAA's verse comes over, that's it. That's what we're looking for. Latest forecast from the high-res European model put down quite a bit of wet weather. This is Tocantins, Goiás, over toward Mato Grosso. We're a bit drier farther to the south in southern Brazil. We just have a look at the anomalies, so you can see how much wetter than average it's going to be here, drier across the south. But the reality is being drier across southern Brazil, coming out of Paraguay, into Paraná, Santa Catarina, and Rio Grande do Sul. That's been an area that for the last 30 days has been wet. See that? So we've had quite a bit of wet weather down here, 75 to up to 300 millimeters of rainfall. Now remember, every 25 millimeters is an inch. Okay, so that's just a quick bit of math there for you. That's a lot of rainfall. So we've now shifted it here. And most of the models keep it in that corridor, this whole corridor through the month of November, showing up wetter. Keeping it drier in the northeast, again, this is a very La Nina-like look. That's what typically happens when there's a La Nina. You tend to just get a strip right here of wet weather. We tend to be drier on either side of this. And we're starting to see the models give us that hint. But what this will do is this will change this graphic quite a bit over the next few weeks. So now 8.81% planted. This is only Mato Grosso. This is not the other Brazilian states. A year ago, 35% planted. If I had to make a projection, I would guess we're going to, whoa, that's a little too much. I would just guess we're going to start to come up like this over these coming weeks. The question is, do we finish November at 70% or 90%? That's what's going to be challenging to try to figure out. But that'll be critical for the entire pattern as it goes forward with respect to how these rains come in and where they establish good moisture. I'll be watching it. So that's all I've got for you right now. I will talk to you again tomorrow morning. Thanks.